All right, so let's resume where we left off. Um, So we should now be up to the layout of a simple C++ program, page 24. As I said, the semicolon is what indicates the end of a line in C++. And line breaks and spacing are mostly ignored by the compiler. There are a few exceptions to that. So we could jam everything all together in one line, or separate it all on a bunch of different lines, and the compiler wouldn't care, but the people reading your code are likely to care. So what we're going to try and do is follow a few simple rules about our style that will mostly be enforced by the editor for you. For example, we indent the contents of a function between the two curly braces. The editor is automatically going to indent if you don't do something different to it. We're going to prefer that you put a opening brace and a closing brace on a line by themselves so that it's a little easier to read. Put one statement per line unless you need more than one line to do a statement, and so forth. On page 25, they talk about the include directive. IOStream is a library. It's some code that was written for you by other programmers, and it was packaged in the compiler and the Visual Studio in this case, so that you could use those routines to do input and output without having to code it all yourself. We'll talk more about namespaces later on, but for now, the std namespace is where cout and cin are declared. So we have to use this line here in order for the compiler to be able to recognize those as the standard output stream and the standard input stream that are coded in the IOStream library. Later on, we'll learn more about functions and the fact that this is a function that returns an integer will make more sense to you. For now, you can just think of it as the main part of your program. And this particular function has an empty argument list. That's the part between the two parentheses. It doesn't have to be empty, but we're not going to really cover that in here, I don't think. So for now, your main function has an empty parameter list. And they return 0 at the end. Means that when this function completes, it's going to send the value 0 back to whoever called it. Since this is the main function, that is actually going to get passed back to the operating system in this case. And there's a convention that if your program completes with no errors, it returns a 0, so that if you're running it inside a batch program, your batch program can recognize the fact that your program completed with no errors, and if it didn't, you have some other value there, it can use that value to try to deal with whatever error you indicated. For a long time, and maybe even now, it was very important to write your include statements exactly like this with no extra spaces anywhere. And the left angle bracket and right angle bracket right up against the name of the library or header file you're using. That may or may not still be the case with Visual Studio or whatever compiler you're using, but it's a good idea to leave it that way anyway. So let's talk about compiling and running your program now. So we currently have Visual Studio running in a debug mode. The other choice is release. If you were ready to create the final version of your program, you would probably want to change to release mode, and there could be configuration changes that would be done. Well, you can actually compile a program in debug mode and run it and go on about your business. There's nothing really magical about that. It's just a configuration issue. And so what we're going to do in here is when we finished entering our code, we're going to start the debugger, tell it to debug our program, and it will basically run our program for us in a debug environment in which you can stop the code or you can execute it one line at a time, and it gives you more control over what's happening while you're working on your program. And it will, by the way, compile it for you in the process. Now, if you start going on more advanced uses of the environment, there are ways to build your whole solution. You can compile only the particular piece of code you're interested in, and so forth. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to hit debug and call it good. So, if I do hit debug, you'll notice that Visual Studio popped up a window. This project is out of date. What that means is some file that I've got in this program, and since I only have the one, this must be it, has changed since the last time it was built or compiled. Would you like to build it? You're always going to say yes, I would like to build it. You'll see the compiling happen, and if it worked, if everything was successful, you'll end up with a console window like this that says, please return after entering a number, enter the number of pods, and you should be able to enter some numbers, and it will produce a result. And then it will disappear because we didn't tell it to stop, and so when the debugger gets through, it's going to end the program and close the window. So if you want it to stop, we can put a breakpoint in our program. That's what that red dot is. And I got it by clicking on this gray bar over here. And I'm going to tell it to stop before executing this line return 0. So now if I run it again, the window stays open because in the background my debugging session has stopped when I hit that breakpoint, and I can see the results of my code. And in addition to testing to make sure I entered my code correctly, I've also proven that my environment is set up to properly compile the program and so forth. Is anybody not able to get their program to run? Everybody got to this point? They've got a window that's showing them good information. Good? All right. And if I want to go ahead and finish my program, I can just hit continue, and it's done now. If you made some mistake in your program and you didn't notice that squiggly red line and you tried to run it, it would tell you there were build errors. Would you like to continue and run the last successful build? And you're always going to answer that no, because you're trying to compile a new version. You want to see what the new version did. You're not really interested in running your program if it didn't compile. So this time I have 2 errors. They show up on my error list. If your error list is not showing up, you can click on View and find Error List, or you can use the shortcuts. So it's going to tell me what the error is, in this case, undeclared identifier, because I misspelled it. And if I double click on it, it will position my cursor to that line for me. It also tells me what line number and what column it found the information in. And it's not always going to point exactly to the thing that it has a problem with. But once I fix all the errors, I should be able to run debug, and it will compile and run for me. So let's look at some self-test exercises on page 29. So number 16. Mr. Saravia Rodas. Okay. If the following statement were used in a C++ program, what would it cause to be written on the screen?
See out.
Okay, see out is the instruction that's going to cause something to be written to the screen. What is it going to write to the screen?
Would it be the C++?
That's right. C++ is easy to understand, period. That's what is going to be output to the screen. All right? Mr. Wilson? Number 17, what is the meaning of the \n as used in that statement?
To create a new line after the after pod.
A new line character, that's correct. Did I skip over the part where we talked about escape symbols? Maybe I just haven't covered it yet. So that's a new line character. All right. Ms. Hernandez, what is the meaning of the statement in number 18? CN extraction operator piece per pod.
Number of input integer piece per pod.
Okay, we're getting input from the CN standard input stream, and we're storing it in the variable piece per pod. And Ms. Moore, what about number 19? What is the meaning of this statement?
The value for total P's is equal to value to number of pods times value of P's.
Okay, let's not think of that as is equal to. The equal sign is the assignment operator. And what's happening here is we're evaluating this stuff on the right of the assignment operator, and we're storing the result or assigning a new value to the variable on the left. So that means we're multiplying number of pods and P's per pod together, getting a result and storing them in total P's. So always think of that as assignment. Assign a new value. All right? Mr. Jackson, what is the meaning of this directive, number 20?
It's the library data program.
Okay. We're telling the pre-compiler to include a library called IOStream. Basically what happens is the contents of the IOStream library is going to be copied into our program at that point. We don't actually see it, but the compiler will see it. And so all of the code in IOStream will become part of our program. All right. I can't quite read your name, Ms. Moody. Okay, Ms. Moody. What, if anything, is wrong with those include directives in number 21?
In A, there's a space after IOStream, and in B, there's a space prior to IOStream, and C is correct.
Okay. We always want to have our include statements look exactly like the one in C with no extraneous spaces. We talked a little bit about debugging already because I told you to use the debug mode in the Visual Studio environment to test your program. Debugging is just the process of eliminating bugs or mistakes from your program. And there are three basic kinds of bugs that you will have in your program. First kind is a syntax error. Syntax error means that you violated the rules of the language. So you put a reserved word someplace where it shouldn't be, or an operator someplace where it shouldn't be. You've misspelled something. Those are syntax errors. And the compiler will not let you compile your code if you have a syntax error. In fact, it will give you an error message. And the second kind is a runtime error. A runtime error is one that you're able to successfully compile your code to produce a program. You can run the program, but at some point while it's running, something goes wrong and a system error is generated. So you may have seen a program come up with some kind of a memory fault, or the most easily reproducible runtime error in here would be a divide by zero error. So if you tried to divide by zero, the compiler won't let you do that, or the program won't let you do that. If you have a zero in the divisor, you're going to get a runtime error exception. The third type of error is a logic error. And a logic error is when your program compiles and it appears to run just fine. You don't get any exceptions, but the results it produces are wrong. They're not what you expected. And that's because you did something wrong that didn't violate the syntax rules, and it did not cause an exception to occur, but it didn't do what you intended to do. So, for example, if instead of multiplying pods and p's per pod together, I divided, I wouldn't get the results I was expecting, but all of the things that I did were legal. That's a logic error. All right? So, Mr. Rahim, number 22, what are the three kinds of program errors that we just went over?
Syntax error, runtime error, not clear.
Okay. Mr. Nelson, what kind of errors are discovered by the compiler?
Runtime and syntax.
Okay, runtime errors are actually thrown by the operating system. So the kind of errors that are discovered by the compiler are only syntax errors. All right. Mr. Gear?
Syntax error.
Omitting a punctuation symbol would cause a syntax error. Okay. And let's skip to number 27 for you, Ms. Hargrove. Suppose you write a program that's supposed to compute the interest on a daily basis, and you incorrectly write it so that it computes annual interest instead. What kind of program error would that be?
Logic.
A logic error. All right. This other question about the compiler reporting a warning. If you see a warning when you compiled your program, I'm going to suggest that you do your best to get rid of it, because a warning in a learning situation usually means that you're doing something wrong. And I've been in a lot of work environments where they try to get rid of warnings as well, because, again, it really means you're doing something wrong that's ambiguous, could be misinterpreted. There's a better way to do it. So you should always try to get rid of all the warning messages that you have when you compile your program. So let's look now at our homework assignment for next week. That's going to be in the content section under assignments. And we click on, oh, that's not right. What happened to my new assignment? That's very strange. Okay, well, oh, I have another section here. So something went screwy. Let's look at the second or the first assignments. No, what's happening here? Very strange. Let me try logging in again. Okay, so there should be one assignment section, and it should have an assignment like this. Is that what everybody's seeing? That was weird. Okay, so here's the assignment. I've copied the text from program project 1 on page 36 and 37. That should be exactly the same as what's written in your book. So you're going to write a program that reads two integers and outputs both their sum and their product. And they suggest that you can start with the program and display 1.8, which luckily for us we've already entered. And they want you to make sure that you follow all the rules and that you end your output with a new line character. And if you don't, something screwy might happen, so it's always a good idea. Here are my additional instructions. Type in the PPODS program and compile it. We've already done those two steps. And then modify it to accept two integers, calculate their sum and product, and then output the results. And here are the grading criteria. So you need to submit an exe file. That'll be worth 7 points. You need to submit a source file. That'll be worth 7 points. When I get your source file, I should be able to compile it in Visual Studio. That'll be worth 6 points. It should do what it's supposed to and not have any logic errors. Okay? 3 points. It should have no spelling or spacing errors. So in other words, running a number up against a word. It should echo the input data. Always a good practice to tell the user what you thought he typed. It should calculate and output the sum correctly and calculate and output the product correctly. And we're going to submit the source code file and the executable file in the Assignment 1 Dropbox. So how would we do that in our program? Anybody have any idea where to start?
We add another variable.
You want to add another variable? Okay, what variable would you like to add?
The sum.
Okay, so up here. And since it's not really about peas and pods anymore, we might want to change our variables entirely. Okay, We might just want to call it first number and second number. Sum of numbers and product of numbers. And if that's too wordy for you, you can make it a little shorter. Enter the first number, enter the second number, now we have a calculation to do. How is our calculation going to change? Any suggestions?
We're going to add numbers, or whatever variable you have for sum of numbers.
Okay.
Put in the calculation.
All right, so how would we write that?
Sum of numbers equals first number plus second number.
Okay. And we have another calculation to do.
It's the same as total P's except changes the variable.
Okay. So in this case, product is assigned the value first number times second number. And we're probably going to change the way we output these a little bit. I said we need to echo our input data. So one way to do that would be to say something like the sum of first number plus second number is some I put that all together. You haven't learned how to do yet, so I'll go ahead and divide it out into different lines. Later on, you'll see that we can do multiple pieces all at once. And since we're ending with a variable here, we either need to separately put a new line character using the escape sequence, like that, or there's a special character constant called ENDL for end line. Either way for now, it's fine. And then basically the same thing for the product, right? Product of first number times second number is product of numbers and now we run that. Give it a couple of numbers. Make sure that it produces correct results. 3 plus 5 is 8. 3 times 5 is 15. You might want to try with a few more numbers just in case. Now all we have to do is submit it, right? So let's go to the Dropbox. Find the Dropbox for this assignment. And tell it we want to put some files in there. So it says drop files here or click below. If you right-click on the tab for your source code file, there's a thing that says Open Containing Folder. There's my source code file, and I can drag it and drop it. Now I just need to find the executable file. So the executable file is not going to be in this folder. It's going to be in a subfolder of the solution called debug. Now, when I drop that file in there, I have a problem. It says invalid file type. It won't let me submit an executable file to the Dropbox. So here's how we're going to get around that. We're going to go to the control panel, and I'm going to choose large icons because that's the easiest way for me to find folder options. Choose View and choose Hide extensions for known file types. I want to turn that off. Because I want to be able to change the extension of this exe file that I'm trying to copy into the Dropbox. So instead of calling it exe, I'm just going to call it ex. It's going to say, are you sure you really want to do that? You're going to say yes. Now you can drop it onto the upload, and it works. Now I say add, and they show up on the list. I've got my CPP, that's my source code file. I've got my EX that I renamed from my EXE, my executable file. If you have any comments about this specific assignment, you can put them here. If you have questions, something you didn't understand, something you want me to read before I grade this, this is not the place to put it. This is only a comment that I will see when I'm actually grading your submission. So if you need me to see it before then, this is a bad place to tell me about it. But if you want to write something here, that's fine. Then click on the Submit button. It will say File Submission Successful. And it automatically sent me a confirmation email to tell me that I successfully submitted that file. Any questions about any of that? All right, if you have individual questions, I will be hanging around for a few minutes. If you want to talk about something, ask me questions. If you're having trouble with something, need some help, that'll be fine. We will have a quiz over Chapter 1 next week. The submission, the Dropbox will close at 5:45 next week. So you have to have everything submitted by then. And I think I've covered everything. So if there are no more questions, yes?
So the Visual Studio 2012, is that free to download online?
You can get Visual Studio Express. That works. That'll do everything that we need in this class. They normally issue credentials for DreamSpark, so you can get the full version, a student version. And if they do that this semester, you'll be getting an email that has your login credentials for that. All right. Any other questions? All right, if you want to ask me something after class, hang around. Otherwise, you're free to go, and I'll see you next week.